Hi, everyone. Hi. Super excited to be here in this panel and see such an amazing event in Edmonton. Today we're going to be talking about operationalizing responsible AI, and we have some amazing panelists to walk through this with us today. I'm going to introduce the topic. I know everyone probably saw it on the agenda, but then kind of get some brief introductions from the panelists, dive into some questions, and please be sure to think of some questions in the crowd here, because we're going to leave about 10 to 15 minutes for questions from the audience around this important topic. So, responsible, and I'm Alyssa Lefebvre. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Market Development for the Responsible AI Institute, and really excited to be having this conversation today. So here's the topic. How can businesses and practitioners operationalize responsible AI? Organizations that develop, buy, procure, use AI have an obligation and responsibility to ensure that systems they are creating and using do not create harm, whether unintended, intended, or systemic. This requires a commitment to developing governance frameworks for responsible AI and processes to integrate responsible AI throughout organizations and to help practitioners gain literacy and capacity in these important topics. And here's the panel to talk about it today. We have representation from AltaML, ATB, CIFAR, and Suncor to talk about how they're implementing responsible AI best practices and governance within their organizations, and definitely to hear from a global perspective from CIFAR around how Canada's leading in this way. So without further ado, we're going to dive into some introductions, starting with Nicole Jansen, co-founder and co-CEO of AltaML.
Hi. I'm supposed to give a pause before speaking so that the mic can be turned on. So you'll note that all speakers will give pauses. So just be conscious of that we're not just not knowing what to say. Like Alyssa said, Nicole Jansen, co-founder, co-CEO at AltaML. At AltaML, we build software products based in machine learning, partially through working with organizations on their AI journey from, identifying the ideas and the opportunities all the way to operationalizing it. And then we also build separate ventures as well that have specialized products. So why am I up here? Well, I am up here because I'm sort of one of the executive sponsors at AltaML for responsible AI, not only for our part in the ecosystem and how we participate in growing this conversation and supporting this conversation, but also internally, how do we make this happen? So happy to be here today.
It was amazing right before this. Nicole's like, how do you want me to introduce myself? And I said, well, say why you're here. So thanks for Nicole, that was awesome. Next, we have Janka Coppins as AVP of AI and Advanced Analytics at ATB. Woo!
So I'm going to be the one who forgets to pause at least once as this goes on, so you'll probably miss something I have to say at some point. Obviously, a few ATBers here, or some strangers are excited to see me, which is also great, I guess. Yes, I'm with the AI and Advanced Analytics team at ATB. So ATB is a Crown corporation. We have about 800,000 customers and 5,000 team members. And we are all about creating the best advice possible for our customers and the best solutions through trusted data and AI solutions.
Amazing, thank you. I'm loving the vibe section in here, by the way. It's really fun. So next, we have Alyssa Strom. So she's the Executive Director of CIFAR and the Pan-Canadian AI Strategy. She is Alyssa 1.0. We've established this. But Alyssa, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm the other Alyssa. It's just absolutely a pleasure to be here this week to celebrate with my friends at Amii. I've been at CIFAR now since 2018, and my job really is to work with our 3 national AI institutes to lead Canada's AI research and innovation and training strategy. And so we work with researchers and the executive teams at the AI institutes across the country, really helping the ecosystem to continue to grow and build and really to advance Canada's leadership. And one of the areas that Canada is truly a world leader in, beyond the technical side of AI, is in responsible AI. And I think we have an obligation to Canadians to continue to be very, very strong in understanding and mitigating the harms of AI, but also we have an obligation to the world. So I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the ways that we're doing that. Thank you.
Great. And last, but certainly not least, is Sam Hayes, the General Manager of Enterprise Analytics at Suncor.
Thank you. Dramatic pause over. Good afternoon. Thank you all in the room for spending a little bit of your time listening to us this afternoon. You're all incredibly dramatically backlit, by the way. You look fantastic. And for those of you joining online, welcome. I'm sure you look equally fantastic at home or wherever you may be joining from. I do lead the analytics business at Suncor. We've been on a journey for the last several years to essentially establish an insight generation capability for the organization with a primary goal of generating in excess of $200 million in free cash flow. So we do actually treat it as a net new business opportunity within Suncor, and we're very excited to be on that journey. We've learned a lot, and we have a lot left to learn. And I think discussions like this one on responsible AI are a very important piece of that learning journey. So I look forward to your questions, and I will do my best to answer them. So back to you.
We had a really great prep session where we went through some of these chats and questions. So there's already a really fun dynamic on this stage, and excited to get into it. Just very quickly about the Responsible AI Institute. We are a member-driven nonprofit that's working towards the first independent certification of responsible AI systems. Everything we're doing is trying to take things that are in, principles and take them into practice and make it implementable to actually within your organization, adopt responsible AI. So some really great leaders on the stage here, and excited to dive in. So we're going to start with Nicole. And, we know that operationalizing AI within an organization isn't trivial. It's not always easy to do so. And adding responsible AI elements doesn't lessen that complexity. So tell me a little bit about the conversations as an executive sponsor about why this was so important for you, why centering responsible AI at AltaML was a big part of that decision making, and I think importantly, what benefits have you noticed about adopting this at AltaML and bringing it into the center for your teams?
Thanks, Alyssa. I think when we started looking at responsible AI, it was very early on. We are an AI company. It seemed to be the right thing to do. But you can't always do just what's the right thing to do when you're looking at something like this, because it is a big undertaking. It's a practice. It's not something you check off. It's something that is continually changing, and you have to keep on top of that. So the conversations where it led us to, though, was there's so many benefits to doing this outside of because it feels good. Part of it is it's really hard to find talent if you're not using responsible AI practices. People don't want to develop machine learning models that are doing biased things and negative things for society and people around them. As a business, the threat of having a model be biased is pretty substantial financially. And I know we're not supposed to talk about finances, but as a business, you do. And so when you look at the financial ruin, really, that could come to a company by getting this wrong, it made absolute sense that we had to do this. And then on top of that, when we are working on operationalizing AI, if those around that are impacted by that model, the end user, the individuals in the business that will see their roles or their business unit impacted, if they feel it's biased, you will not get adoption. So all of a sudden you've put this big investment into AI, and it's not getting adopted because people don't feel that it's developed in an ethical way. And so then it's a completely wasted investment.
Wow. Thank you. And it's interesting too, because I know as much, I don't think anyone intends to create a bias model. And so having these practices, as you mentioned, and processes implemented in a way that I've heard from practitioners many times, they feel safer not holding, all of the burden or the responsibility and accountability of, making sure models are and, systems are deployed responsibly. So that's an interesting point as well. Before we move on to the next question, I'm curious if any of the other panelists want to add around some of the benefits from a organizational standpoint of putting responsible AI at the core. Go ahead, Sam.
I would. I was looking at my notes here and fully agree with the talent point. I think when we look at the talent across the ecosystem, this is both an attraction and a retention lever that has to form part of a holistic way in which we manage talent. So I would absolutely double down on that comment, Nicole. I agree.
Great. So next question, we really wanted to make this discussion very practical and tangible so everyone can leave with some questions to ask within their organizations or ideas to implement. So the next question, we're going to start with Janka. What have been some of those tactical and practical lessons that you have learned from not only introducing but scaling responsible AI at ATB? They have been very much a leader in this space. And do you have any advice that you would give to others who are just starting their journey or potentially even further along from the maturity perspective in terms of, scaling this within an organization, what to do, maybe what not to do, or things to consider as they start?
Thank you for that. I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm really going to talk about 2 points. So the first is, having that trusted external partner that can provide objectivity to your AI governance framework. So right now, industry tends to be ahead of the curve versus policymakers in this space. It's one of those things that's leading to, a shifting landscape in terms of upcoming regulation. We know it's going to change. So ATB made the conscious decision to ensure that we're not developing our frameworks and maturing them in isolation. The other added benefit with having a trusted partner or having an external partner work with you is the fact that you can actually have a voice and provide some feedback in terms of upcoming policies and the governance that's being introduced to support them. So I would say that's been one big enabler for us is the trusted partnerships with external parties. And then the other piece I'll add is really about as you're scaling AI, and the capabilities across the organizations, and you're adding in the responsible AI components to that scaling, it's really being pragmatic about your approach. So it would be easy to get hampered down with a lot of bureaucracy around this, and then, you're going to start hindering innovation. So there needs to be that balance there between that. So it's about acting with intention and knowing the purposes of your ethical principles and the models that you're implementing to ensure that you're focusing the right attention on the right processes, the right models at the right stage in development.
Great. I know one of the things we often really think about is how do we make it practical and lighter touch to actually implement this, not recreating the wheel with processes and things that are already developed, but really just augmenting what you already have so that it's an easier change management exercise internally. Any thoughts about, things, what to do or what not to do, or things that you've learned as you've gone, Nicole, Sam, Alyssa, as you've started to roll this out and scale it within your organizations?
I would reiterate that point about working in partnership. Nobody is the expert on responsible AI. No company is the expert. You have to work together. This is so new. There's so many new things being looked at every single day. And so in order to really make sure that you are at the forefront, you do have to have those partnerships. Little pitch over here, Responsible AI Institute is a pretty awesome partner. But that really truly is key. And the other thing that we have actually seen at our team is diversity in the team is so, so important. And we have seen things where, and it's not even, your race or your gender, but it's the experience in your life. Because there are times where an entire team will think, yes, this looks good. And then one person will say, well, no, but this. And nobody else would have had that life experience to be able to identify that. And so it really has pushed us to make sure that our team truly is diverse in every aspect.
I was going to jump in on that diversity point because it's something that we work really hard on at CIFAR and with our partners at the AI Institutes is really trying to bring new and diverse and broader perspectives and experiences into Canada's AI ecosystem. When this ecosystem started growing, even here in Edmonton 20 years ago, it wasn't very diverse. And it wasn't very diverse across Canada when I started working in AI in 2018. And so, we've really recognized that point that bringing people together who have different experiences, and as Nicole said, it's not just about race or gender, it's about what you've experienced in your life, what your education has been, what you've tried, how you've learned. Bringing all those different voices to the table means that we do get people asking questions, and we do get better products and services that come out of it. And the key point there is also inclusivity. Not only do we need to have diverse teams, but people have to feel empowered to raise their voices to say, something about this doesn't feel right to me, or we did it this way where I was previously, and this is how it worked. And so it's really, really critical, I think, across the AI ecosystem that we keep bringing in people with all kinds of different perspectives and expertise.
Absolutely. A culture of safety and being able to speak is key. One of the reasons I joined Responsible AI Institute is because it's really a lot about people and what that actually looks like. So those were great comments. Thank you. And I swear I didn't even pay Nicole to say that at all. I didn't. So thanks, Nicole. So we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're hearing some comments from Alyssa. It's a meaty question, so forgive me for reading it, but going out internationally and having a lot of these conversations as the Institute, it's clear that Canada has been lauded in regards to the vision with not even the Pan-Canadian AI strategy and the competitive advantage it's given Canada compared to other countries. It's very strategic and it's very well thought out, and it's often referenced in other in other countries' strategies. But the Canadian government has also been a leader with responsible AI at the federal level. I learned it this year, actually, that it was the first, or last year, sorry, there was the first national government policy for responsible AI in the world. However, the definition of responsible AI or trustworthy AI no doubt changes from country to country. That's a meaty topic, as you can imagine. And so, Alyssa, I'm curious on your thoughts on how Canada can continue to be a leader in this space and what you think Canada's ability to positively influence this should be on a global scale.
Yeah, we're really in a very privileged position in Canada. So we have a very, very long history of AI research in this country. CIFAR actually started in 1982. We're coming up to our 40th anniversary. And the first research program that we launched in 1983 was called Artificial Intelligence, Robotics, and Society. And through that program, we built collaborative research networks in AI across the country and continued in that work over the course of the last 40 years and building collaborations and networks internationally as well, and always really focusing on building expertise and leadership in Canada. And so, we got to the point in Canada in 2017 when our expertise was being drawn away from Canada. And that really led to the development of the Pan-Canadian AI strategy and the recognition that we had something really strong in Canada. We had these 3 amazing centers for AI research and innovation in Edmonton and Toronto and Montreal, and that we needed to build those. And not only did we have this amazing expertise and leadership on the technical side of AI, but we had this very, very strong culture across the ecosystem around responsible AI. And so we saw grassroots movements emerging across Canada. We saw the Montreal Declaration for Responsible AI come forward, and huge leadership from the Canadian research ecosystem in drawing that forward and working with citizens to come up with ideas and principles around what does that mean to the average person. And the rest of the world took notice of that leadership and those ideas and the way that we were engaging with citizens. And we saw this cascade of frameworks around trustworthy AI and responsible AI that came through. And now finally we're at the stage where we're implementing and applying those frameworks to real life. And so Canada has really also been a leader very much on the world stage. So very active at the OECD in working with, the 27, I think it is, maybe 37, member countries of the OECD to develop shared principles and understanding and knowledge around what does it mean and how do we do it and how do we use AI to advance social benefits and economic benefits for the world. And Canada has also been very active in a new organization called the Global Partnership on AI. This is something that Canada and France came together to form when Canada was the president of the G7 in 2018 also. And really it was an idea that Prime Minister Trudeau and President Macron really saw such synergy between Canada's values and France's values and our shared culture, and wanted to do something that would bring the rest of the world together. And so that organization now is a wonderful, really research-led place where leaders and experts come together to talk about some of these challenging policy questions and issues around AI and help to develop solutions and bring in civil society organizations and technical expertise as well as policymakers to come together to develop solutions. So it's really critical that Canada not only, demonstrate our might on the technical side of things, but also, use our well-respected Canadian reputation in the world to also advance the real deployment of responsible AI as well.
Thank you. Janka, you mentioned, I'm going off script, so get ready, guys. I just thought that, you had mentioned in your earlier response having a seat at the table and understanding the regulation and kind of, how have you found this conversation within ATB about Canadians' position or Canada's position, or, I'm sorry if I did go off script, so you can, but what's it like to just sort of kind of always have to be on the leading edge within your organization to know what's coming, or to understand what's happening from an international perspective?
I think it's exciting, but also really challenging. So challenging because there's obviously real implications, and if regulations change on you and you stray too far, you're talking, there can be some pretty big consequences, a lot of technical debt, a lot of rework. It's just work we're not accounting for anymore. So I think that's one piece, but it is exciting because, it gives us a chance to define what it means to us. And I would say at ATB, responsible AI is not simply about reducing risk, but it's also about creating opportunities. And for us, we think there's actually a really big opportunity to differentiate through responsible AI. And, where I'm going with that is, if you think about the impacts that the financial industry can have, and particularly the use of modeling, we're impacting financial allocation to people, right? So that's a pretty big deal. And then we're talking about automated decision solutioning, right, on top of that. So for us, it's an opportunity because, if we do this right, over time, customers are becoming more and more digitally aware and savvy. And with that, they're going to have more concern over data sovereignty, right? So if they feel trust that we're doing the right things with their data and we're enabling them and it's a benefit to them, then we can differentiate on trust as well.
Love that. It's interesting when we had to pick an area of focus for the Responsible AI Institute. Financial services was top of the list, not only because of it's a highly regulated industry, they're used to it, but also the materiality of the types of models, but also health, procurement, and HR, where humans are really, really the ones going to be impacted if things go wrong. So, Nicole, can I go off script for another question? I'm just looking at the time. I'm like, we're blazing through this, so I have lots of questions. You have a lot of networks, and AltaML has leadership on an international scale. So just going back, kind of feeding off Janka's question or answer, are you seeing that competitive advantage coming up, or how prevalent is responsible AI and the discussion around that competitive advantage in your networks?
I think there's a knowledge of it. There's a desire for it, but I don't know if people are fully educated on what it takes. And so it needs to be at the table. It needs to be part of the offering. It's an expectation, but it also requires a lot of education at this stage. People want to do it, but they need to see the benefits, like I talked about. From a corporate standpoint, there are benefits that are financially driven, but they also need to understand really what it's going to take, and that this is a journey. What I like about it, I'm hearing it kind of a couple times here, is this opportunity for Canada to really globally be the leader of responsible AI. There's 3, superpowers, taking on AI right now, but neither of the other 2, I won't name names, could probably claim the responsible piece. And I think that that's up for the taking for Canada. And we have the opportunity to grab a hold of that, but it's going to take government, industry, and academia to make that happen. And so I think that that's where I'm really seeing a lot of the need, is industry to come and be part of that conversation, not expecting that government and academia will create this brand in itself. So that's really something that keeps getting me pulled into, that I'm very much supportive of.
Great. And this is a great lead into your question here, Sam.
Do you mind if I comment? Actually,
I would love for you to
on
comment.
your
Absolutely.
Can I go off script on your off script? Okay.
All bets are off, guys. Here we go.
Well, I think just maybe linking the 2 questions you asked, I think it's very important for organizations to be very honest with themselves as to where they are at on that journey. We at Suncor, we're at the start of that journey, and there's a lot we don't know. I think responsible AI, it's an important topic. It's a complex topic. It's a difficult topic. And I think what we have to be very conscious of as we start out is we must not make responsible AI a taboo subject for any organization or any stakeholder, because if we do, we'll lose the richness required. I think it was commented here, like no one's an expert in it, right? We're all starting on this learning journey, and therefore you've got to be very honest about, okay, well, where am I as an organization? What do I not know, and where do I need to seek help? So
I won't name names, but I was having an interesting conversation a couple weeks ago where I was chatting with some lawyers who didn't want to actually dive into the responsible AI practice and uncover the risks because they didn't want to know they were there. And no, it's a real concern, and it's a real cultural thing, to your point about how do we actually do this. So that's a really great point about being kind of intellectually honest and having a sanity check about, honestly, no one in the world has this figured out. It's, again, going back to the point that it's not trivial, and it takes some time to start. So I think now I'm going to lead into your question, Sam, and it dovetails really nicely. So I was going to ask, are you seeing the connection between responsible AI and core tenants in the energy sector, like social license to operate and ESG? Do you think connecting these things, ESG and responsible AI, will support the operationalization of it at your organization? I think my big question is, does it need to come from the top? He made fun of me when I launched. He's like, no softballs, eh? So here we go.
No, thank you for the question. I have definitely reflected on it. So I think, yes, very much we see the connection. And I say we, I think Suncor sees the connection. I personally see the connection as a leader in this space, and I would say my leadership team sees the connection as well. Operationalizing it is a different story, and I think, as I've already said, we're at the very start of that journey, and I think the answer is it's a bit of a combination of, yes, it needs values-based leadership from the top, but it also needs organizational focus from grassroots in terms of where am I going to deploy my effort, because you cannot fix a problem or fix an opportunity this large all at once. You're going to have to prioritize like anything else. One thing as well that I wanted to comment on as I've heard what we're discussing is I think it's really important to think of responsible insight generation. I think we tend to orient to the more complex algorithmically we become, the higher the risk, whereas I think it's very real to suggest that you have equal opportunity to mislead or misinterpret or communicate with inherent bias as much in a descriptive dashboard as you do with the most complex machine learning. And I think, we are all data practitioners, we are all stewards, or we should all be responsible stewards of the insights we create. And I think that's very much the attitude that that my team is approaching this with, is it doesn't just have to be AI, it's that values-based decision on how you're going to steward the insights you create as a practitioner. I think back to your question, it is going to be table stakes, right? Responsible AI, leading practice around insight generation will be table stakes for our industry, the same as I think any other industry represented in this room. As with any emerging core competence, I think you have to decide which side of that you're going to be on, right? You can decide to adapt early, and you can take a leadership position, you can develop a core competence, and you can have influence. If you adopt late, then I think you do that at the risk of increased cost, increased complexity, and a very marginalized voice at the table for what responsible AI can look like at a national level. So maybe I can talk a little bit about what are we doing with.
Yeah, I was going to ask, where do you start?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we've had a number of these kind of, I would say, values-based discussions as a leadership team in terms of, okay, well, let's look around the table and say, is this important to everybody sat here? Like, this is what we do for a living. Is it important? And I think a resounding yes is the answer, certainly from the people that I work with and represent. We do believe it's a critical space for us to lead, but as I said, we have a lot to learn on what leadership in this space looks like, and I think we're open to that. And I think one of the bellwethers for me as well is that talent piece, which is it's not just, hey, is it the right thing to do? Do we expect to do this as corporations? It's like, no, if I want to attract and retain the caliber of talent that we currently have, this is, again, table stakes for that employee proposition and talent proposition beyond our organization right now. We're starting at where does informed opinion come from, in terms of a number of bodies that could help us on that journey. I think the other thing that's important for me as well, I liken it to learning good form early. So if anyone's a skier or a golfer, you want to learn good form early because it takes a lot to correct those bad habits after the fact. And I think we're conscious of that, and we want to learn good form early. I think maybe what I wouldn't mind doing is maybe leaving a few thoughts for this audience as well, which is, you need to engage, you need to question, you need to debate. As with any kind of values-based area that's still being defined, you have to form your own opinion, and you have to hold people to account. You have to be part of that debate as to what you think is responsible AI. You can form your own opinion, and you can hold the stakeholders you work with to account. So I think I may have said earlier as well, the debate is crucially important. So we have to all decide to engage in that debate and not shy away from it. So I think I answered your question.
You did. It was excellent. Like, you're accountable to me. No, you're great. Alyssa, go ahead.
I just wanted to jump in on the talent piece, because I think it's something that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, that trainees who are coming out of our universities, whether an undergraduate or a graduate degree, 5 years ago, we didn't have discussion about responsible AI or ethical AI in our computer science classes. And that has changed. And I think it's mostly changed because of the demand that's coming from the young people, the young practitioners who are now getting educated in this field and moving on to take on careers in this sector, in the private sector and public sector and beyond. And I do think that demand from the early career practitioners is really critical. And I think I want to encourage all of you that are here today in the audience, entrepreneurs, innovators, researchers, please continue to demand very very, very high integrity, high principles, high ethics as you continue in your careers and as you continue to build and develop AI products and services.
Can I jump back in?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I'm that panelist. I think just the role of education is so important as well, right? This isn't an analytics or data practitioner's topic. This is a topic for everybody. And I think as we get started, it's unreasonable to expect that non-analytics practitioners inherently get this. So I think there is a role for all of us to be educators in this space as well, even though we may not be fully versed on it ourselves. I think that's a really important piece to add, is don't be afraid to share the knowledge you do have with those who are on a learning journey too.
This is where it's vibing. Here you go, Janka, go.
Well, I'm just going to add a recent story we had at ATB, just jumping off that point, because I would say 2-3 weeks ago, we did do some data literacy training for the leaders. And, it was a short teach. You only want to throw so much information at people. But it was a diverse group of leaders across the organization. And we threw a half-hour time slot at the end for a case study. And the case study that they had was a thin credit case study. So they had to put themselves in the position of an employee who has to come up with, how do I assess somebody's credit who is a refugee? Right? And the interesting thing about this one is we only had a couple of slides in the deck when it came to responsible AI. So, it wasn't a big teach, but I would say where most of the tables focused their attention on was, every data point they came up with, they found something wrong with it in terms of it's a bias, it's not explainable, it's not reliable, but it always came down to bias in terms of what they were most passionate about. And afterwards, people were really thinking, because there were some branch managers who came and, talked to different people on the teams. And they were mentioning things like, in my branch, I deal with a lot of artists. How do we make sure we're not biased against them? Like ATB does really focus on entrepreneurs, and we try and do our best by them. But now they're thinking about it from data in a different perspective, which I thought was really interesting. And another group was like, what? I handle 2 branches at the university. We have a lot of international students. They're not coming over with the typical credit history that, the other students are. So I just thought that was interesting in terms of how people can start thinking about this at all levels of the organization.
That's a really great, tangible example of the principle of human in the loop, right? And using our own human judgment and values to interpret and deploy some of the recommendations and predictions that are coming out of the models.
I think it's another great tangible example why you need diverse perspectives, and not only just from all walks of life, race, gender, but also business perspectives. Different branches having different business perspectives, business unit leaders. You need that mix inside of an organization to be able to scale it, to train people, all the way from the executive to the person at the branch that might be using a prediction to make a decision. That person needs to understand how that works for them and what to do, and put processes in place so that they feel comfortable and trustworthy themselves using the predictions in their work. And it can change from branch to branch. Just a great example. So Nicole, I'm going to do a rapid fire question at the end, and I have a couple key thoughts, but then I'm going to turn it over to questions to the audience. But Nicole, any other thoughts or comments about how AltaML started? What was, or any... She's giving me the look. Okay. Any other final thoughts before we go into the rapid fire questions?
I think the biggest thing I would like to tell the room is, if you encounter an opportunity where you see something that you question and maybe isn't quite right, please, please, please put your hand up and say something. Because your background is different than everyone else's background in the room, and it can be super, super valuable. And so I hope that wherever you're at in your career and in your organization or in your education, put up your hand.
I love that. So I just want to offer a final couple key thoughts around, responsible AI and where to start within your organization. And it starts with a few key things that all the panelists have brought up here. One is adopting a definition of what responsible AI means. 2 or 3 lines that make sense to you, but also a framework. And there are many out there, and happy to talk through what that looks like. But really just getting a core understanding of what it means for your organization and how to define it. That's a really easy place to start. And And then you can start to really look what your policy and governance roadmap might look like to scale it across their organization. So wanted to leave that with the group in terms of a few things that you can take back and maybe ask the question of what is our definition of responsible AI? So wanted to kind of leave this on a fun high note. Not that it wasn't a high note, but wanted to leave it on a kind of a fun note, a little bit tangential from responsible AI generally, but what is one AI application or use case in society or in your organization right now that you're really excited about? I think we all believe that AI will change the world positively, especially with the proper guardrails. So what gets you really excited? Nicole.
I'm just going to give one example of a project we're working on that I'm really excited about. We're working with the government of Alberta on wildfire suppression and looking at where to position equipment appropriately for the areas that are most susceptible to wildfires. So as a individual who, like many of us, are now living through spring, summer, fall plus fire season, it's going to be great to hopefully make a difference there.
Janka?
Okay, this really puts me on the spot. We have quite a few of our data scientists here, and I don't want to look like I'm playing favorites to any one thing. So I'm just going to answer from a greater good perspective and society wellness. And I would say that has to do with financial health. So, anywhere where we're actually predicting early signs of distress and we could intervene before it actually turns into financial distress for a customer, I think is actually pretty cool.
We have such diverse perspectives on this panel. It's super exciting. So at CIFAR, we've done a lot of work over the last few years on AI for health, and certainly over COVID, looking at the opportunity to deploy machine learning to help us in our response. So that's a personal passion area. And as we're heading into the second phase of the strategy, we've got health as a priority, but we also have energy and environment as a priority. But for me, actually, the area that I am most excited about is in transportation, because I really feel strongly that machine learning applications in cars in particular, but also in trucks and planes and trains as well, has the opportunity to really decrease human suffering, right? So if we look at autonomous vehicles and the opportunity to deploy computer vision and other machine learning applications in cars, I think it's really, really a critical application. And then also to reduce overall the impact on the environment that our transportation systems create. So I'm excited about transportation.
I would say in a work context, I am most looking forward to some of the safety outcomes that we can drive. Our number one priority is to send all of our people home safely at the end of it every day. And I think there are some very tactical examples of how we can do that. For example, start of a job on any site will be something called a toolbox talk, which is where the supervisor will go through any prevailing hazards or risks for the job that day. We're able to use NLP to actually focus those conversations onto the more precise historical references of what may have happened on that job in the past, even at other sites, and we can transfer learnings from one to the other. So I think those kind of tactical examples, I think we've got a very rich safety backlog in the company in terms of opportunities we can go after. So that's what I'm very interested to do.
Those are fun and fantastic and diverse. So just want to thank the panelists for such a dynamic and fun conversation. Thank you for letting me go off script. And I'm going to turn it over for some questions to the audience. We have, about 15 minutes for some Q&A. So there is a roving mic, I believe. So there's a question right there. And please stand up if you don't mind and introduce yourself as well. We want to get to know you.
Do I stand up? Hi, my name's Jasmine Moore, and I'm a PhD student at University of Calgary. And I guess my lab works a lot in the medical field in terms of AI, so we have a lot of these discussions around interpretability and responsibility and ethical AI, but I'm just curious, I feel like there's been kind of mixed definitions even within this panel about is it responsible because we're trying to reduce fire hazard, or is it responsible because it's a fully interpretable model that we totally understand why it's making these decisions? Or are we talking about both things? And I was wondering if you could kind of specify and go into more depth about that.
I'm happy to start, but Yeah, so the way that the Responsible AI Institute has defined responsible AI is around 6 dimensions. Explainability and interpretability is one of them, fairness and bias, consumer protection, security and privacy, accountability, and system operations. That's a test, guys. So system, I did it, I passed. So we define it across 6 dimensions, and the reason you're gonna see things like system operations as being part of it, because how it performs is a part of defining what responsible is. And so everything along those 6 dimensions have an implementation framework and sub-dimensions, which happy to talk to you more about, but that definition, that framework was defined by looking internationally at established best practices and principles through OECD, World Economic Forum, the Global Partnership on AI, ISO, IEEE. So it didn't come out of nowhere. We didn't make it up ourselves. What we did is we looked at the well-established principles and standard internationally, and then decided that this is how responsible AI should be defined, and then use an implementation framework and assessment that allows you to understand how you kind of rate from a responsible AI perspective. Now, every organization has the opportunity to adopt their own definition, and they can use elements of frameworks that exist. But that's how we did it, and that's how we're seeing it. And happy to turn it over, but I hope that answers your question. It's not a simple question. How do you define responsible AI is part of that seat at the table that Janka was talking about, because internationally, there's no standard guidance on this is the well-accepted definition of responsible AI. So a lot of passionate people carving out the space to define that, but there's no one definition.
I guess I can add to it from the ATB perspective quickly, because we had a lot of the same factors that we considered. So fairness, safety, now this is a test for me, responsibility, transparency, accountability, explainability, and robustness, I think. And we worked with the Responsible AI Institute and, added some context around some of that. And I'd say the next level is, that's great. We've incorporated that into our AI ethics framework, which is in our ATB ethics framework. But it's drilling that next level down. So what do those words mean? So in practice, for instance, is it okay for us to look at something like, alcohol consumption when we're making decisions? Or is that breaking one of those biases? And, coming to an agreement on an organization in terms of, okay, down to layman terms and tactical level, what do we do?
I think one just final comment on that is I think historically, there has been a narrow definition of responsible AI focused on bias and fairness and explainability and interpretability, which are very, very important dimensions. They obviously take a big part of our framework in particular, but I think in order to scale it across an organization and actually implement it and operationalize it, you do need to consider kind of the end-to-end and kind of think outside of just those typical understandings of what responsible in AI means. And performance has a lot to do with that. So I hope that answers your question, but happy to dive in more even after the panel if you have more questions. There was another hand up kind of.
Yeah, hi. No, my name is Pallavi and I'm a data scientist at ATB Financial. And I have been building machine learning models for more than 5 years. But what I feel is, if I look at the life cycle of AI project, we check for the AI ethics and bias very late in the life cycle. Like after we build the model, then we see, oh, this model does it has bias towards any age or gender or any socioeconomic background. But at that time, I feel it's quite late to look at that because no data scientists want to build a bias model. And it usually comes from the data itself. And so my question is, do organization look at the time when they collect the data, like data collection, or they look at their data warehouse and see, do they have representation from all the socioeconomic background, or is there a representation across all age or all different groups? Because at that time, we can, if we have enough data, then we'll not have problem building bias model.
I don't think that there is one way to do it. I'm hoping one day there is a gold standard that companies can deploy. Those of us up here, we're kind of some of the trailblazers a bit in trying to make this happen in our organizations. I know for ourselves, what works for us might not work for others, but ours starts from the ideation stage of identifying who could be impacted by this idea that we're putting forward. And then again at the data collection and again throughout the whole process to operationalization. I hate that word.
I've been stumbling over it the whole time.
But it goes beyond that too, all the way through as you're monitoring it and maintaining that model. It never really stops.
Yeah, I think if just to comment on your question there, it also comes back to the idea that responsible AI is not the purview solely of a data scientist. I think responsible AI has to be built on a foundation of transparent and clear data governance as well. It's a values-based system that comes from the data as much as what's inherent within the model. So I think that making sure you have the widest possible aperture of how you're ethically and responsibly using data both from within your organization and externally, because that you still have to query the data from third parties as much as you do your own data. So I think that's a really important point that you kind of touched on there is your responsible AI framework has to be more than just the model. It has to be holistic and start with good governance and good data hygiene.
Governance is key. I think that's the point. We really should be looking at it pre-deployment, deployment, and as things drift and things like that as well. So it really isn't one set it and forget it bias test right before pre-deployment. It should be embedded in the entire process of the life cycle. And that's why even when we're looking at our future certification, it's an audit, and the audit depends on how the data behaves and data operates. So it's not a yearly audit necessarily. It might be quarterly depending on the level of materiality and also how often the data might adjust or change. So I think that's part of why when we talk about it not being trivial is because it's not just one single little thing. It's an end-to-end process and governance that requires a variety of different lines of defense and people within the organization so that the burden and the risk doesn't lie on someone who might not know about the unintended harms. And so even a robust harms mapping exercise at the beginning, and so you understand what potential risks and opportunities might be with an AI system, is a key part of that process. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. There's one here I'm not going to pick. There's a few, and I think the panelists will be happy to take some off the side.
Hello, this message is for ATB Janka. Hi Janka, my name is Legbo Manegbo. More interested in as far as what you touched on earlier in terms of those three personas for you guys as branches in terms of international students and also refugees and also artists and their various constraints and along the path to achieve their various respective functional wellness goals. How are you guys bridging that gap, and would you guys engage with other FIs in the industry to also alleviate some of those constraints as well?
So I caught everything until the last part. How are we bridging the gap and?
And also, would you engage in partnership with other FIs in industry to help them bridge that gap as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first step alludes to what's been talked about, in answering the last question as well as it came up previously in terms of, responsible AI is an accountability of everybody in the organization. There's use cases that we wouldn't even think about. So one is awareness. So, ensuring that we up our game with data literacy across the entire organization so that everybody can contribute to the identification of potential biases or the need for new systems and processes, right? There might not even necessarily be a bias in place, but we just might not have a good way of addressing a certain client group or a segmentation. So I would say that is step one. I think this is an area where we need to be partners with other institutions and not competitive with other institutions, right? Because if we all up our game when it comes to responsible AI, we collectively get better. And I don't think that's that's a piece that we need to compete against each other on, but rather raise the collective whole. So, we keep having to have the conversation with our peers, with the organization, with other organization, and just keep driving towards it. It's going to take work. Like, this isn't going to be an overnight solve. We're all, we've all got data sets that have inherent bias in them because they're based off of decisions people have made in the past, right? So it's going to take some work.
That was a great question, and I will just mention, at the Institute we convene a working group where there's a variety of representation from financial institutions around. We're using a topic or a case study or a system of automated lending where ATB contributes to that conversation. And so I think a big part of that is not being competitive, but working to rise the whole industry up and be leaders, internationally and continue to collaborate on what does good look like and how do we continue to drive this forward. So it was a privilege panel, and I'm really humbled with all of your perspectives and leadership. And just thanks for the great energy in the room and the great questions. And I hope you enjoy the rest of AI Week. This was great.